Something just happened inside Iran that almost no one is talking about. And I don't mean on the battlefield. I don't mean in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean inside a room in Tehran, behind closed doors, where the man who was literally sitting across the table from American negotiators was suddenly told he was no longer welcome at that table. Not by Washington, not by Tel Aviv, by his own people, by the men in uniform who are supposed to answer to him. And in the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what that means, why it changes everything about this war, and why what is unfolding right now in Tehran could reshape the entire Middle East before the end of this month. Stay with me. Because the story most people are getting on cable news is incomplete. And the part they are leaving out is the part that actually matters. Let me paint the picture for you because the speed at which this is all unfolding is genuinely staggering. Just a few weeks ago, you had two countries that had been exchanging fire for nearly 2 months finally agreeing to a ceasefire, April 7th, 2026. A 2-week pause. Pakistan stepped in, Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, Field Marshal Asim Munir, 21 hours of talks in Islamabad. You had Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf sitting across the table, a man who had commanded IRGC brigades in the Iran-Iraq War, a man who had run for president 4 separate times, a man who knew every single faction inside the Iranian system. This was not some low-level diplomat. This was the closest thing Iran had to a unified voice in a negotiation, and Washington knew it. And then, on May 8, 2026, that voice went silent. Ghalibaf was out. Not because he quit, not because he was ill, because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps decided he was too willing to talk. They pulled their own former general off his own negotiating team. And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about who is actually running Iran right now, nothing will. Here is what happened in real time, and you have to understand the sequence because every single event builds on the last. The ceasefire goes into effect. Pakistan is mediating. Iran is supposed to submit a unified counter-proposal. The deadline comes, nothing is submitted. 0. Not a delay, not a partial document, not a request for extension. Silence. And then, on the very same day that Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi publicly announced the Strait of Hormuz was open, IRGC forces opened fire on commercial vessels in that same strait on the same day. State television in Iran called Araghchi a fool on live air, the foreign minister of a country being publicly humiliated by state media while he is literally in the middle of diplomacy. And then within hours, the word spread that Ghalibaf was gone. Now here is where it gets even more unsettling. The official Iranian response was a flat denial. Iranian authorities said the reports were baseless. Ghalibaf had not resigned from anything. And then, within minutes of that denial, Ghalibaf himself, President Pezeshkian, and Foreign Minister Araghchi all posted nearly identical statements on their social media accounts, word for word. 3 of the most powerful men in Iran all publishing the exact same sentence at the exact same time, saying there are no radicals or moderates in Iran, only Iranians and revolutionaries united under the supreme leader. Think about that for a second. 3 separate men, 3 separate offices, 1 script. That is not coordination, that is dictation. Someone wrote those words and handed them to the president, the foreign minister, and the parliament speaker simultaneously and told them to post it. And the only organization in Iran with the power to issue those kinds of orders to all 3 of them at once is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The denial itself was the proof. The unified statement was the evidence of a divided regime. They tried to deny a coup, and in doing so revealed exactly who was running the show. So let me give you the names because most coverage of this conflict is treating the IRGC as a single abstract entity, but this is being driven by specific individuals and each of them matters enormously. The first name is Ahmad Vahidi, IRGC Commander-in-Chief, appointed on March 1, 2026, right as the war was escalating. Vahidi is not a conventional military figure. He commanded the Quds force from 1988 to 1997. He is on Interpol's Red Notice list for his alleged role in the 1994 AMIA bombing in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people. This is the man who is now effectively the most powerful person in a country of 92 million people. The second name is Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, an old IRGC figure who by multiple accounts cannot even coordinate effectively between the different power centers that are now fracturing inside the regime. And then there is Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, son of Ali Khamenei, whose health and whereabouts have become genuinely uncertain, because according to multiple informed sources, a military council of senior IRGC commanders has built a security cordon around Mojtaba and is actively preventing him from receiving government reports on the state of the country. Read that again carefully. The supreme leader of Iran is being kept in the dark by his own military. The man whose word is supposed to be absolute law cannot access basic information about what is happening inside his own country. This is not a power struggle. This is a completed takeover dressed up in clerical clothes. And you might be asking yourself the obvious question, why would the IRGC do this? Why would any organization sabotage its own country's diplomacy in the middle of an active war during a ceasefire that was quite literally keeping the economy from total collapse? The answer is brutal in its simplicity. The IRGC does not want peace because peace is more dangerous to the IRGC than war. Let me explain why, and I want you to understand this clearly, because it is the key to everything. The IRGC is not simply a military force. Through its construction and infrastructure conglomerate called Khatam al-Anbiya, which Ghalibaf himself once led, the IRGC controls major portions of Iranian construction, oil services, telecommunications, petrochemicals, and banking. Through its proxy networks, it funds and directs Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias across Iraq and Syria. Through its intelligence wing, it manages domestic political enforcement. And through decades of political maneuvering, it has colonized almost every major institution in the Iranian state. A genuine peace deal means budget scrutiny. It means civilians asking why an organization that consumes this much of the national economy is necessary. It means the proxy networks lose their justification for funding. It means the internal security apparatus faces questions it cannot answer. War removes all of those questions. War is the answer to everything because war makes the IRGC indispensable. So when you see what happened to Ghalibaf, when you see the negotiating team dismantled, when you see the Strait reopened and then closed again, when you see the foreign minister humiliated on state television, you are not watching chaos. You are watching a calculated, deliberate campaign by an organization that has decided it would rather burn the country down than lose its grip on it. And the situation on the ground for ordinary Iranians is catastrophic in ways that most Western coverage is not conveying properly. The IMF estimated Iran's economy will contract by 6.1% in 2026, with inflation running at nearly 69%. The rial has lost roughly 60% of its value since the conflict began. The middle class has been hollowed out, and now the U.S. naval blockade is strangling what remains. Defense Secretary Hegseth described it as ironclad, nothing in, nothing out. On Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal, storage facilities are filling up faster than the country can sell oil, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent publicly stated that within days those facilities would reach capacity, forcing Iran to shut in its own oil wells. Now here is why that detail matters more than almost any military development in this war. When you shut in an oil well, you do not simply turn it back on when the crisis passes. Restarting requires billions of dollars in new capital investment, and you permanently lose 5 to 10% of that well's productive capacity. Iran is not just losing revenue today, it is physically destroying its own economic future in order to survive the next few weeks. And senior Iranian economic officials have reportedly warned President Pezeshkian privately that rebuilding the economy could take more than a decade. Even the governor of Iran's central bank has urged the president to pursue a peace deal, but the president cannot get a meeting with the supreme leader. He has made repeated requests. None of them have been fulfilled. The man who is constitutionally supposed to run the executive branch cannot communicate with the man who is constitutionally the highest authority in the country. The economic experts are telling the president to act. The president cannot act. The supreme leader cannot be reached. And the IRGC, which created this vacuum, is filling it with its own commanders. Trump's response to all of this has been far more calculated than most people are giving him credit for. When intelligence assessments confirmed that the Iranian negotiating team, including Arakchi, may not actually have the authority to approve any agreement, Trump did not launch new airstrikes. He did not declare diplomacy dead. He extended the ceasefire and simultaneously tightened the blockade. He kept the door technically open while turning the economic pressure to levels not seen since the Iranian Revolution. And he has now threatened secondary sanctions against Chinese banks facilitating Iranian oil transactions. China has been Iran's economic lifeline for years, buying discounted Iranian oil through a web of intermediaries. Cutting off that lifeline would drain Iran's roughly $35 billion in foreign reserves within months. And Iran with no foreign reserves cannot import food, cannot import medicine, cannot pay government workers, and most critically for the IRGC's calculus, cannot pay its own foot soldiers. An IRGC that cannot make payroll is not a loyal IRGC. The same Basaji forces that crushed the 2022 and 2025 protests cannot be relied upon to suppress the next wave of unrest if their salaries stop arriving. Trump is not trying to bomb the IRGC into submission. He is trying to make it financially impossible for the IRGC to maintain control. Now let me walk you through the three scenarios that every serious analyst from Washington to Riyadh is currently modeling, because each of them carries enormous consequences. The first scenario is what some are calling the controlled implosion. The IRGC completes its internal takeover. Ghalibaf is replaced at the negotiating table by Saeed Jalili, one of the most hardline figures in the entire Iranian political system, a man who served as chief nuclear negotiator from 2007 to 2013, and is widely understood to be capable of sitting at a table for years without ever signing anything. The blockade continues. The economy contracts another 10 to 15%. Inflation crosses 100%. Protests return to the streets, potentially larger than anything seen in 2022 or 2025. And the IRGC, which now controls everything nominally, must decide whether to massacre its own population again or allow the regime to fall. The second scenario is a negotiation breakthrough. Economic pressure becomes so unbearable that fractures appear inside the IRGC itself. Junior commanders whose salaries are delayed start questioning Wahidi's leadership. A back-channel message emerges from the Supreme Leader's office. A new negotiating framework is assembled, a face-saving arrangement, partial nuclear restrictions, limited sanctions relief, the strait reopens, oil prices fall, and the immediate crisis ends. But notice the word immediate, because even in this scenario, the structural reality of a paramilitary organization having swallowed the Iranian state does not disappear. It just goes dormant for a few years. The third scenario is the one that serious people are losing sleep over. A cornered IRGC, recognizing that economic collapse is coming regardless, makes a final desperate gamble. An attack on Gulf state infrastructure, a strike on American naval assets, or in the worst case, an attempt to use Iran's remaining enriched uranium stockpile to dash toward a nuclear weapon. Trump would then face a choice between massive retaliation that could send oil to $150 or even $200 a barrel, or backing down in a way that would define his legacy for the worse. This is the scenario that every actor in the region is trying to prevent, and nobody knows how close to it we actually are. And I want to be direct with you about what this means for people watching this in places that have nothing to do with the Middle East. Gas prices have already surged roughly 30% since this war began. The European Central Bank has postponed planned interest rate reductions and raised its 2026 inflation forecast. Economies that depend heavily on energy are now facing a genuine risk of technical recession if the maritime blockade persists through the summer. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 20% of global oil supply and over 80% of the caloric intake for Gulf Cooperation Council states. When that strait is disrupted, it does not stay a regional problem for long. It becomes your mortgage rate, your grocery bill, your retirement account, and your job security. All of it connected to decisions being made right now by men in IRGC uniforms in Tehran who have decided that their political monopoly is worth more than their country's economy. Here is what I believe you need to sit with as you process all of this. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as it was constituted in 1979, is functionally over. What replaces it is being decided in real time. The clerical regime that governed Iran for nearly 5 decades has been quietly absorbed by a military organization that now wears clerical clothes for legitimacy while ignoring clerical authority for decision-making. The Constitution still says the supreme leader is in charge. The operational reality is that a man on Interpol's red notice list for an alleged terrorist bombing in Buenos Aires is effectively running a country of 92 million people, with the third largest oil reserves in the world and an advanced nuclear program. Every empire that has consumed itself in this kind of internal coup has ended the same way. It either reforms or it collapses. History does not offer a third option. It only offers a debate about the timeline. What you are watching in Iran right now is not just a story about the Middle East. It is a story about what happens when a paramilitary organization grows powerful enough to eat the state from the inside. And the world will not look the same on the other side of it.